Yeah, that's okay. So, creo que vamos a empezar.
Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone. I see that this is an important subject. We have a lot of people in the room to discuss this topic. Just a few words of welcome, and then I'll give the floor to our experts that are sitting next to me here. At the European Commission, we support change to an efficient economy in the use of resources and low CO2 emissions to create new opportunities for economic growth and employment. We also want to foster innovation and competitiveness in the EU, limiting environmental impact in the use of resources. The future gives us tremendous opportunities over the long term, and we want to move forward towards a society that reuses its waste and turns them into resources. This week, our Commissioner for the Environment, Commissioner Vella, and organizations like the Ellen MacArthur Organization in today's discussion, and large companies as well, their objective is to promote work towards a circular economy. And I have Jocelyn Blériot next to me here who's going to explain to us exactly what that transition means. On my left here, I have Caterina Fortun, our expert on the financing tools in the European Union. And she'll explain how we can get financing for these projects, these environmental projects. Now, what we want to do today is to have an exchange of ideas and best practices at national level with participation from many different Spanish regions. And we also want to present innovative projects in the area of circular economy. This is a real exchange of knowledge and networking, fostering synergies and collaboration. We also have a specific objective, another specific objective, which is the celebration of these meetings. We have an exhibit with 11 experiences and best practices in circular economy, where we'll have the opportunity to listen to those who are developing these initiatives. I also like to welcome today all of those who are listening to us on the web. This is being web streamed. So welcome to all of you as well, all of you who are watching and listening to us. Now, without further ado, we're going to give Jocelyn the floor to tell us something about the transition of the economy.
Hola, muchas gracias por su...
Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm Jocelyn Blériot, and I work for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, focusing on circular economy. And now I'd like to speak in English, with your permission.
So I don't know if this is working. I had a... maybe here. Yeah, so as Jürgen was saying, we're live on the web as part of the Foundation's Disruptive Innovation Festival. So obviously a lot of people around the world are watching this session right here. And a lot of people are running around trying to get the screen working. So I am confident we'll get there. There we go. So the Foundation is a not-for-profit organization. We're based on the Isle of Wight in the UK, and our sole purpose is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So I'll go into a bit more detail when it comes to the opportunities of such a model and what exactly we're meaning when we talk about circular economy. Of course, the first reflex when one hears the expression circular economy is to think about material flows and productive loops and recycling and material handling. So it's true there's a big element of that. But by the same token, it can't be reduced to that to those material flows, and it's a much more complex picture because, of course, it's a system shift that we're talking about. And this is the diagram that we've put together in order to try and explain what this circular economy actually looks like at systems level. So as you see, there are many different loops of different values, of different materials. And there is a divide between the biological cycle on the left and the technical cycle on the right. It's important to get that distinction because, of course, if you mix up all the elements, then the material flows are less efficient and you lose a lot of value in the process if you can't separate them at the end of their useful life and re-inject them in the productive loops. One thing that was very interesting when we started putting some figures on that model is the fact that if you look at the outer loop on the right of the diagram, which is about recycling, it's really, really far away on the right because we and the circular economy model consider that it's the loop of the last resort, in the sense that in order to break down the materials, the products to their material state, it involves a lot of energy and a lot of value is lost in the process. So actually, it might be counterintuitive at first, but the fact is that the value really lies way before recycling, in the reuse, in keeping the materials and products at their highest quality and highest level of use. So, of course, that has an impact on the way products are designed because they need to be designed to be disassembled and reprocessed, upgraded, remanufactured. And the business models as well do change in the sense that it's more based on the use and the maximization of the utilization rate of the assets rather than just simply deriving value from selling more and more stuff. Maybe it's a question of selling the access to the products rather than the products themselves, in which case the consumer becomes a user and the product gets more useful lives and maybe more life cycles as well. So if the collection rates are increased as well, there is a massive, massive economic opportunity. Now, on the left, what we see as well is the fact that we can do much better by way of capturing value in the organic material streams. Most of the time, organic byproducts just get either landfilled or burned, and actually that bypasses a lot of value extraction opportunities, because now with the growing trend of biorefineries and biotechnologies, there are a lot of high-value molecules that can be extracted from organic products. And also, of course, the fact that a lot of the nutrients currently don't go back to agricultural land means that there's a loss of soil productivity, which is constantly on the rise. And the reliance on chemical fertilizers is problematic as well because, of course, they are from finite stocks and they tend to have a negative effect on soil productivity as well in the long term. So once we had done this initial mapping of the circular economy loops, what we wanted to do was to get an idea of how that translates in terms of figures and economic opportunity. And we teamed up with the consulting firm McKinsey & Company to give us to ask them to give us a quantification of that opportunity. And the first report that we produced was published in January 2012. And it looked at the opportunities of a circular economy applied to the manufacturing sector in Europe. Specifically to look at one product category which Eurostat poetically calls medium-lived complex goods, which is your smartphone, your washing machine, light commercial vehicle. And that represents about 48% of European GDP. And what we found was that for that sector alone, by adding one life cycle to the product and upping collection rate a bit, but not doing any major tweaks to design or any major legislation changes, the opportunity in material savings was around $380 billion a year. We're talking about dollars because, of course, it's the currency that McKinsey works with. And that was the conservative scenario. And with design changes and more enabling conditions put together by legislation, then we can increase that figures to more than 600 billion a year. And that was quite impressive. And of course, that very first report actually was the document that got us to open a dialogue with the European Commission in the first place. Ellen MacArthur herself presented that to 5 commissioners, and as a result were invited to sit on the European Resource Efficiency Platform put together by Commissioner Potočnik. He was Commissioner for the Environment at the time. The second sector that we looked at was the FMCG sector, fast-moving consumer goods, so cosmetics, food, clothing to a certain extent. And we took a global look at this sector because it was more relevant. And actually what we saw was that in terms of input, 80% of the material inputs that go into that sector at global level every year, 80% of that gets discarded and never gets reused, never gets reprocessed. So only 20% of what goes in, and it's a huge value, we're talking $3 trillion here, only 20% of that gets captured. So it's a massive, massive wasted opportunity. And that quantification led to the realization that actually our linear model of taking stuff, making products and discarding them, which has been very successful over the course of the Industrial Revolution, lifting billions of people out of poverty, that was starting to bump against some physical limits. And also, of course, there are increased challenges with the global population rise. And more than the actual absolute numbers is the fact that levels of consumption rise because that population has access to a lot of wealth, and it's a great thing, but it means that middle-class consumers are more and more numerous, and that puts a pressure on the systems that we depend on. Once we had done these initial quantifications, which had actually also got us into the World Economic Forum, who has seized the topic and made the circular economy one of their focus areas, we wanted to go back to the European case and say, if we take the levers that we've identified in our reports, and if we push them in an ambitious fashion, where does it get us in terms of Europe as a system? Let's imagine that Europe embraces circular economy in a really meaningful way. Where does it get us? And we decided to look at 3 sectors, which were mobility, built environment, and food, because together they represent about 62–63% of European household expenditure. And actually what surprised us most of all when we dug a little bit deeper was not so much the economic opportunity, which of course is there, but what surprised us to begin with was the fact that actually we think that we live within a model which is very efficient. And some sectors, like the automotive industry, typically people will think it's very mature, it's very efficient, and actually it's almost come to the maximum of what it can do in terms of saving and efficiency. But actually, when you look at the figures, what we have is a model of mobility that relies mostly on private vehicles. The European average for cars sitting idle is 92%, so that's very, very inefficient. Cars spend more time parked than doing anything else, and if they're not parked, they're looking for a parking space. And what we have is essentially is 1.2, 1.5 tons of metal and polymer, transporting on average 1.5 person, when actually it has 5 seats. And all of this in a very inefficient manner, because the internal combustion engine is notoriously inefficient in converting energy to actual motion. So it was interesting to look at it this way. And also we saw that if you look at increasing the share of, car sharing schemes or mobility, which would be on demand and not necessarily relying on the fact that people own their cars, well, it changes the paradigm completely. And I remember having this very interesting conversation as part of this research with the chief architect of the city of Barcelona, Vicente Guarart, who said that as they were increasing the number of car-sharing schemes in the city, they needed less parking space for private vehicles, which meant that in some places, He could increase the actual size of the pavement, which meant that there were more people walking, and also he could reintroduce more natural services and ecosystems, more green in the city, which was a great unintended consequence. So all of this to explain that actually it's not only economics and hard figures, it really is a systemic shift, and it has a lot of interconnected relationships. But of course, the figures themselves are very important as well. And we looked at, still within the boundaries of these three sectors, if we push circular economic models, increase remanufacturing, and rely on higher utilization rate of assets, rather than building new ones all the time whenever there's a need, well, you displace a lot of need for virgin materials, which means that, of course, the impact on the material consumption is quite important, and the impact on CO2 emissions is important as well. And what you see on that slide here is the comparison between current development path and circular economy scenario. The starting point for the figures is 2012, and 2012 is the index 100. So you see CO2 emissions in 2030, for instance, in the circular economy scenario amounts to a 48% reduction compared to figures of 2012. And the same applies to primary material consumption, which in European terms is very important because Europe is the biggest net importer of raw materials and resources for its industry. So there is an issue of independence when it comes to supply, but also protection from volatility in markets, which is very high at the moment. Now, all of this naturally is bound to have an impact on employment, but I think at this stage it's important to be realistic and honest about the fact that it's very, very, very difficult to give figures around employment, or to know. There will be sectorial shifts. Probably the primary sector will see some jobs disappear, while the service sector and everything that's around materials management and the design of products, the handling of products, reverse logistics, probably will see an increase. But it's interesting to see that this question is, of course, at the heart of the agenda. And this slide shows a note which was put together by the French government strategy office, looking at circular economy and trying to quantify this. So they admit in that very document that it's very difficult to quantify. But there's an interesting idea in there, which is if you want to measure the progress of your circular economy, then maybe one proxy which is good to do that is to show the number of jobs directly related to it that it creates. Having said that, there is a need to qualify what exactly is a circular economy job, otherwise you don't really know what you're talking about. You know, do the jobs that are created in the traditional recycling sector count as circular economy? All of this means that if you get the right questions, you start to refine the answer as well and have the right definition of what's a circular economy, what's a circular economy job, and how is actually the progress that we think we are making against, how does it stack against reality and the figures. So the French government has put the circular economy at the heart of their energy transition law, which was adopted in August 2015, and all of this shows that there's a really big momentum. And of course, the question of jobs is difficult to tackle, but there is a report by the Club of Rome which quantifies that for Spain, the circular economy potential in terms of jobs could be about 400,000. Mostly in remanufacturing and materials handling. Remanufacturing, which is actually quite a big part of the argument as well, because if you start treating the assets as things that can be shared and have multiple users and multiple lives, they need to be designed for it, they need to be also processed in the right way. And one thing that can be said about jobs in this context is that typically the remanufacturing happens close to the market. So there's no point shipping products to be remanufactured at the other end of the world. They need to be the remanufacturing process needs to happen where the use happens. So we've seen that with examples, for instance, Canon, the Japanese photocopier imagery equipment company, has a remanufacturing center in Germany, for instance, and that's not exactly where the labor is the cheapest, but it doesn't make economic sense to ship the products back to Japan to be remanufactured. They have to be dealt with where their users are in order to be economically viable. And that's working really well. So that's one of the things that can be said about jobs in a circular economy, is that it tends to create local, non-offshoreable jobs as well. Now, going back to the European side of things and the way the Commission has tackled this, this is the note that came out in 2012, one of the very first manifestos for a resource-efficient and ultimately circular economy in Europe. All of the work was started by Janusz Potocznik in his tenure as Commissioner for the Environment, and the great thing that he did is that he convened a multi-stakeholder platform, so Commission, Parliament, private businesses as well, NGOs, a lot of stakeholders, and everybody was co-creating around that common goal of the circular economy, rather than say, this is what I want, this is what I want, and we'll end up on the lowest common denominator. If we agree on the vision of a circular economy because we believe, and the figures show that it brings competitiveness for Europe, how do we co-create that? And that was a very interesting dynamic, because it really led to the Commission taking this approach very seriously, and under Vice President Timmermans, last December, the Circular Economy Action Plan was adopted. One of the first legislations to come out of this, and it relates to the left side of the diagram that I was showing earlier, is the creation of a market for organic fertilizers, which didn't exist previously. So finally, a lot of the potential of these organic byproducts is going to be harnessed. And the Commission is currently working for 2017 at a massive piece of legislation around plastics, which is a key material due to its functional property, but also its volume and also its longevity, and some other potential concerns. There is a huge economic potential there as well. So working through business models, investment opportunities, we'll be releasing a paper on investment opportunities for the circular economy at the end of December during an official EU Commission event, so more on that later. But what we see is that the system approach is being taken very seriously, and there are a lot of good signs emanating from a lot of stakeholders. Private businesses are taking this on board, legislators are taking this on board. Of course, the education community has to be harnessed as well, because if you want this to be a long-term proposition, then you have to create the right skills and the right mindsets. But I'll just finish by saying that there's a great dynamic at play, and the fact that I'm here today, invited by Katerina and Sandra to talk about this, is a testament to that. So thank you very much, and I hope we have great exchanges during the day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Josh. That was very interesting. Muy interesante.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. If you have any questions at this stage, hold on to those, please. Because first we're going to listen to Katerina, and then we'll have our Q&A session. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. We're very happy to see you all here at this event. Here we want to share our knowledge about the circular economy from the point of view of the European Commission to tell you what we're doing, collaborating with international foundations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and national authorities, international authorities, and also with SMEs, because the change is happening through you. In my presentation, I'm going to explain what we're doing at the Commission in terms of legislation. Justin also mentioned a little bit about that, why we're interested in the circular economy and what financing we've made available through the SMEs, public and private financing. So the second part of the presentation will be on all of the financial instruments that can be used, and sometimes they're not used because people simply are not familiar with them. So we want to make you familiar with these. The linear economy has grown over time and has taken us to the time of the crisis. That's a model where we manufacture and then throw things away. But we have to think about what we're doing with all of this waste. Where are we throwing it? All of these cars and automobiles and so forth, they all are going somewhere. So it's very important to go back to the natural cycle, because now we're just using 1.6% of the planet. We have to start using resources in a much more sustainable way. And the ideal thing is to not throw things away. The product should not be considered waste at the end of its life. There are new technologies at our disposal, and there's new investigation going, and there's eco-design, so that we can remanufacture, reuse, update these appliances, and not just recycle. So the circular economy is much more than recycling. Now, with the use, this has already been mentioned, but I'm going to reinforce the message. But we need to think about whether we really need the product, or is it the service that we need? What is it that we need? The service of the electrical appliance, the television, the telephones and so forth, or cars? Or do we need to possess them, because we can change this system that will also generate new possibilities, business opportunities, because we're thinking about a new business model. And then waste management that the Commission presented in 2015. It presented an ambitious package regarding waste, but also with the measures that we think we need to support all of these different steps in the circular economy. Now, how this waste at the end can be used as resources as raw materials, second-hand raw materials, we could say. So in terms of growth, now, if we do something, we do this because we think that it's going to be profitable. We believe in this because we've been working with companies as well. As Jürgen said, right now our commissioner with the Director General, who is Spanish, Daniel Calleja, who all of you know because he's given a lot of talks on circular economy, are in China, and they're working with big companies there and international organizations. One of them, some are Spanish as well, and they're talking about this change and talking about the need that for all of us to work together towards this change. Now, what growth do we expect? Well, in comparison with a linear growth, we're talking about double. We're talking about 1.8 billion euros and 3 million job posts. That's 2 times what was created with what we call the linear economy. In Spain specifically, we expect growth and the creation of 160,000 job posts, which is double the 80,000 that are expected if we continue with the linear economy and exploring these new business opportunities. Now, these new business opportunities, let's talk about those. In other words, introducing innovative products and services can generate 7% growth in GDP. And of course, the profits in terms of economy and social and environmental greenhouse gases can be reduced between 2 and 4% with this new model. And the current model is not sustainable, and we do need to make this change. And this is an opportunity. We don't interpret this as a forced change. This is an opportunity for growth. We have the technology, new technologies that we didn't have in the past, and we need to continue researching along these lines. Today, we're using 1.6 times the planet to supply demand. And the middle class is growing, which is very good, but we have to address that issue. There's going to be more than double the middle class by 2050. Another important factor is the vulnerability of resources. Companies are very vulnerable to the raw crisis. We've had the oil crisis, and today there is a lack of raw materials in the world. So we have to think how we can become stronger, more resilient to deal with this vulnerability. Now, if we recycle and if we know how to reuse and transform waste into raw materials, well, that's a huge competitive advantage. Europe imports many more resources than it exports. Europe imports 6 times more than it exports. We are living at the expense of others, and we generate 5 tons of waste per person per year. Per person, each person here per year produces that amount of waste, and we only effectively recycle about 1/3 of that amount. But as I said, the Commission does not want this package to deal only with waste. We're going to explain how we're supporting all of the different stages of the circular economy. Now, the measures that we're implementing and the legislative proposals the targets for the Commission for the Member States are being approved at the Council and Parliament right now. Now, what are we doing exactly? We accepted a series of measures to reinforce. During the first stage, the production stage, we want to support circular design, what we call eco-design. We support this with laws as well as with financing. The European financing and the agreement of the European Commission is developed according to the pyramid of waste. The first thing we want to support is prevention. In other words, think how to design products so that they don't generate waste. It's through research and development and innovation using new technologies. Now, in terms of consumption, we have to think about how we can maintain the product going. You see, how we can maintain a product longer on the market and conserving the value of the product with maintenance. Maintenance is local work. This would not be outsourced. These would be local. And the next step would be the remanufacturing and reuse. How can we make it recirculate longer? Now, if it's designed using this eco-design, I can maintain it, I can update it, and I can have a version 7 or 8, for example, with a much higher value using less energy than if we simply recycle a mobile telephone. Maybe we were saving 2 or 3 years through recycling, but if we change our idea from the very beginning and we think about long-lasting products that we really want to recirculate in our society, then the companies will benefit because they're recycling, reusing their mobile telephones, for example. They can use those same materials, and that middle class, which is growing, as I said, and we can also benefit as citizens and consumers. Now, management, the next step is once there's no more value left, then it does become waste, and the Commission supports proposals or obligations right now where we think it will be the best way to recycle this waste. And the ideal idea would be to recycle 100% using new technologies such that everything can turn back into a raw material so that it can then go back to the design stage. That would be the ideal situation. Now, the sectors that we're focusing on that we think are the most important in creating greater profit for the society are plastics, food waste, critical raw materials, construction and demolition, biomass, and biomaterials. Now, what have we done up until now? The European Commission has proposed this legislation based on waste. We have an action on public ecological hiring. There's a lot of people here from the public sector. Does anyone have experience with ecological hiring? There's a case in Barcelona, I believe, that have used this this guide. It's in Spanish. I can send that to you, and you can. There's a public hiring model based on ecology for buildings, for office materials. In Barcelona, I think also for street cleaning and the collection of waste. And this has created a lot of job posts and a lot of services for citizens that makes our lives easier, and it makes it easier for us to recycle. Also, we've improved practices in the reuse of water. In Madrid, for example, is a good example. Madrid uses recycled water to clean the streets and to water plants and parks. And that's a standard practice. And there's also a platform on food waste. We have a proposal, a draft regulation on the reuse of materials and standards for secondary raw materials. Since we're focusing and supporting this sector, then we need to create standards to make sure that these secondary materials play their role in the cycle. And I'm going a little bit fast because I don't have much time, and I need to talk about financing. Now, the initiatives that we're working on, as I said, eco-design. There's a lot of financing for this first stage, this preventive stage. The ecological label, we think it's important to know what impact this product will have in ecological terms. The environmental footprint of the products. We also need to know what that footprint is. In negotiations with legislative proposals on waste, we established targets for that. The targets, as I said, and that 65% is the target of municipal waste should be recycled between now and 2030. 75% of plastics, of containers should be recycled, and only 10% at most can be incinerated or thrown into dumps, into waste dumps. And bioeconomy, and also communication of turning waste into energy, how we can take advantage of the energy of waste. And just to give you an idea, this is where we can see the different countries, Spain in this case, at European level compared to the most green is in composting, recycling, and landfilling. Spain is below the European average, but it's important to point out that Spain has focused on a very ambitious plan, the PEMAR plan. Do you know that plan? The PEMAR plan, you probably know it better than I do, where there are very ambitious. Therefore, that things will change and our ranking will change, I think. Now, financing. What is available to you? Well, we have the 2020 program. We're also working for 2018, the circular economy. We have 680 million euros set aside for that. The calls for private participation, then we're going to generate more than 500 billion. There are obligations, for example, in Spain, 2/3 of the 20 billion euros have to be devoted to R&D plus innovation, to SMEs, to the ICT technologies, and low CO2 emission technologies. Now, how are they implemented? What projects are selected? Well, that depends on the national and regional authorities. But at the Commission, we believe that we have to change our idea. We have to change our environmental ideas, our transport, and we are supporting increasingly R&D, innovation, SMEs, ICTs, and low CO2 emission technologies. Therefore, of those 150 million euros, this is for 150 billion, that's for all of Europe, that's being invested in those 4 priorities that I just spoke of. And we also have the Strategic Investment Fund, European Fund. We started with 315 billion, and given its success, this amount has been increased. There's a proposal now for 630 billion euros that will be implemented or injected into the European economy between now and 2022. This is an initiative that we're proposing at the Commission by Commissioner Juncker and managed by the European Investment Bank. Also, through that same instrument, we're financing R&D, environmental projects, sustainable projects, energy projects, renewable energy, of course. And we also have a LIFE project. We have projects financed under LIFE. This is not an instrument, it's a program with 3.4 billion euros in 2014-2020. Each year there are calls for projects. It has grants as well as financial instruments and support for NGOs. And the calls are closed for 2016, but there will be new calls for 2017. On this sheet, you have the link as well, and it's on the webpage as well, how to apply for financing. You can also take advantage of the projects financed through LIFE. We have projects financed in the 2020 horizon. There's 2 or 3 there. And cohesion policy, we have many ERDF and ESF funds. So it is very possible to get financing. So what we tried to do today is to select projects that have benefited from this so that they can serve as a model. And you can talk about how to access this funding. And to finish up, the cosmic financial instrument that supports SMEs in general and entrepreneurship, access to financing for companies, and the internationalization of those companies, and has about 2.3 billion euros for that. Now, the cohesion policy, I already explained this, the different areas that we focus on, both in terms of energy efficiency. We have a specific section of 5.5 billion euros devoted, used for waste management. Now, the important message, however, is that we're not only talking about managing this waste. The important thing, and what we really support in the SMEs, R&D, and the ICTs, is all included in this circular economy. And here, I'm going to send you this presentation. I would like also to mention an important thing in terms of innovation. We're working to be able to use ERDF funds, and the regions had to develop an intelligent strategy. Now, right now, we're working in the community of Madrid in this intelligent technology. This is an exercise, a bottom-up exercise, where we're applying a business discovery process. And we're looking as a region where I can concentrate, what priorities I can establish, what key sectors I will support, the sectors that are going to make me more competitive, not only at national level, but also international. So in other words, it's facing the challenges of globalization. I also invite you to consult the Intelligent Specialization Platform. This is a platform to exchange best practices. There's very interesting information about the RDF funds there. And just to finish up, I wanted to mention that one of the national projects, the SME initiative, we're managing that with the European Investment Bank group. It's being managed by the Ministry of Finance and Public Administration. And this is an initiative that's implemented in 17 autonomous communities, almost all of them, and we have 18 million euros for that. We've signed contracts with 9 banks. The banks are mentioned there so that you know where you can access financing. Now, this instrument is through the banks. We at the Commission and the European Investment Bank, we provide this financing that supports financing through the banks. It's 50-50 financing, where 50% are public funds, European funds in this case, and the banks then will support the most innovative SMEs, the SMEs that are having greater difficulty gaining access to financing and requiring fewer collateral. So lower interest rates and so forth. In just 9 months, because this data is just up to June, in 9 months we've been able to support 2 billion in financing in volume, 2 billion in financing of SMEs, because we have a leverage effect here where the minimum that we established was 4, but we expect that in communities like Catalonia, the Basque Country, Madrid, to get up to 7 or 8. And up till today, we've supported almost 22,000 SMEs through this finance scheme. Also, I'd like to mention what SMEs, so it doesn't seem so distant. The SMEs that we've supported are small. Sometimes these are even micro companies, because that's how that's the economy in Spain. 70% of these have very few employees, and a huge percentage has fewer than 50 employees, so they're very small companies and startups. This was not an obligation, but right now, with the figures, we're very happy to see that 20% of these SMEs were startups and identified as startups with, in other words, they've been in the market for fewer than 3 years. And I think that with that, I'm going to stop. I could continue speaking on and on, but we're going to send you this presentation with the links and all of this information that I promised you on this sheet. Thanks very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thanks very much, Caterina. Now we know everything that we need to know about financing for SMEs in this area. Now, we're going to listen to you. We open up the Q&A session. Would anyone like to ask a question to either of our 2 speakers? Do we have a microphone here to pass around?
But we need a mic.
The interpreter is waiting for the microphone to be passed around. I'm going to speak in Spanish. I understand English, but I apologize for I do not speak English. My question is for the English speaker. I wanted to thank you. Thank the organizers and Catherine. My question, I come from the town of Móstoles, from the town hall of Móstoles, just outside of Madrid. I'm a politician, and my concern is the creation of employment. Creation of employment at local level is difficult. In our case, in Móstoles, the former government left us in a very poor state of economy. And so how can we go from this linear economy to the circular economy that we heard about in the first presentation? How is that going to affect employment? What kind of employment will be created through this project that the European Commission is advocating. Those 260,000 jobs that are created, or that they think they will create, will they precarious jobs? Will they be low-quality jobs? Will they be exploiting young people? What types of employment will be created? There's a lot of economic studies that have been done. All kinds of things are going to be accomplished, but there's no studies on what type of employment will be created by the circular economy. That's what I would like to know, please.
Sorry for replying in English. I think I understood the question. It was about the job creation and what kind of job and what level of quality of the jobs will be created as well. As I said in my presentation, it's really difficult to forecast in terms of numbers, of course, but there are a lot of things that can be said about some material handling and recycling that has been done in a very traditional fashion, as if it was at the end of the line. So there's no involvement of that workforce in getting the high level of quality of those materials. It was more getting rid of them. And then it was getting rid of them in a more efficient fashion. So, but it was still end of pipe and very much at the end of the stream. And what we found, we talked to a lot of companies who do that, for instance, and when you take the people who do the design process of the product and then you involve the people who are at the end of the line handling those materials and with the mission to get them back to a high value state, then it changes the proposition, and that workforce feels more involved in the process and wants to feed back on the quality of the material. You could do it like that, and it would make more economic sense if we process it like that. So it's a more, I guess, I don't have the answer to all of your questions, of course, but what we see is that it's a more inclusive system where you don't have people creating stuff and then people kind of disposing of it in a very crude fashion. It's a more integrated process where maybe people who were called waste managers in the past will be now materials management companies, and then you have reverse logistics, and then you can put a lot of high tech into that as well. There's the digital economy is offering massive opportunities when it comes to tracking material flows, embedding product information. So all that materials management becomes a value management throughout the economy, and everybody's involved in that. So I think there's a lot of potential to upscale and up the level of quality of the jobs associated.
Karina, ¿quieres añadir algo?
Bueno, igual seguimos.
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?